Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So, with the Player's Handbook Playtest 8, we have a new version of the Druid, and by that I mean there is another new version of the Druid. So, when the whole playtest started, I think we all knew that Wild Shape needed a tune-up, at the very least. I did a video early this year titled, You Don't Know How Wild Shape Works in D&D, and Neither Do I. This is 9 years after publication of the 2014 Player's Handbook, and we still don't really have a shared understanding of which racial traits carry over to Wild Shape, which beast forms are available, how to determine if your character has seen a certain kind of beast form before, if it hasn't come up in gameplay, because that's important for some reason, how Wild Shape mixes with other shape-changing features or spells, how to figure out your saving throw bonuses, how expended hit dice work on a short rest. I mean, I could go on, but basically the whole thing is a mess. And that's just figuring out how it works, because then we got the balance thing, where it's making Moon Druids overpowered at level 2, and then at level 9, Wild Shape is pretty bad. So it's unsurprising that the main thing they seem to be focusing on in the Playtest Druid is constantly trying new types of Wild Shape. So in Playtest 4, they did the template thing, so you got 3 templates with no internal customization options at all. The only significant difference between them was the movement type, and they didn't do anything interesting. And perhaps the nail in the coffin, they were very weak. There were some other changes, like you could speak in Wild Shape, and your hit points weren't replaced by that of the form. So in the survey, they must have scored so badly that Jeremy Crawford was on YouTube promising to change the Wild Shape rules before that survey even closed. And they never told us how it scored. We just got some nervous laughter when Crawford and Chris Kendrick brought it up. To this day, I think that if those templates in that playtest had varied customization options and the templates themselves weren't weak, it might have scored 70%. However, the takeaway from the designer's perspective is that the issue wasn't the weakness of the feature or the lack of interesting abilities of Wild Shape. It was the use of templates that was the issue. So in Playtest 6, we went back to picking beast stat blocks to Wild Shape into. However, there were new restrictions put in place. You could only pick a few forms. You started at 3 and eventually scaled to 5 that you could Wild Shape into. And you still used your own hit points rather than having them replaced by the beast forms. And they just flat out said you got to keep all your species traits while Wild Shaped, so you didn't have to guess which ones transferred and which ones didn't. And I actually thought that version might hit the 70% mark, because the reaction online that I saw seemed a lot better than it was for Playtest 4, even though there were still a lot of problems. But apparently that wasn't the case, because then we were told that the Druid, along with the Barbarian and Monk, needed another try. And Playtest 8 came out, and I've gone through this Druid line by line looking for all the changes from the Playtest 6 version, and other than using the Druid spell list instead of the Primal spell list, the only difference I can find are the rules for Wild Shape, which I guess isn't unexpected. So as we go through this version, there are a number of changes from the 2014 Player's Handbook, but other than Wild Shape, we already saw these changes in earlier Playtest Druids. So the simple weapon proficiency, the light armor and shield training with no metal armor prohibition, Druidic now giving you automatic preparation of speak with animals, Primal Order giving you the Magician and Warden options, Find Familiar as a class feature using Wild Shape, Wild Resurgence allowing the swapping of Wild Shape uses for spell slots and vice versa, Elemental Fury boosting either cantrips or attacks, Commune with Nature becoming an automatic preparation, Elemental Fury scaling at level 15, Beast spells at level 18, and the Druid capstone at level 20. These have all been carried forward from Playtest 6, basically as they were, so I'm not going to cover them in detail again. What they did change is Wild Shape again. So the first thing you do is you pick what forms you can Wild Shape into. In Playtest 6, this was 3 forms, capping at 5 forms at level 8. Now you're going to pick 2 plus half your Druid level rounded up. So you start out with 3 forms, but eventually you could know 12 forms. And you can switch out one of those selections after a long rest. Now they say here that you pick your stat blocks from the player's handbook, and this is new. And they add this bit at the end that you can select from the monster manual or other sources only if the DM permits it. This is a good change. We have a curated list, but if your DM wants you to be able to select some of the weird options from published adventures or what have you, or they're fine with players shopping through stat blocks through the monster manual, they can allow that, but it is spelled out you need your DM's permission. Good. So when we look at game statistics, it says your statistics are replaced, but you retain your hit points, hit dice, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, class features, languages, and feats. And you have both your own skill proficiencies as well as those of the beast whose form you've taken. Not that a lot of beast forms have skill proficiencies. It also says use the higher bonus if both your character and the wild shape forms have the same proficiency. So you don't need to worry about adjusting the bonuses on your base character due to changes in strength, dexterity, constitution, and proficiency bonus. At least in regards to skills and saving throws, because it does affect something else that I'll bring up later. And so what is missing here? Species traits. Yeah, they have decided to remove your druid's access to their species traits while they're wild-shaped. So in the 2014 Player's Handbook, it's kind of fuzzy which traits you get and which ones you didn't. I mean, it's really fuzzy. Then in Playtest 6, it was just keep all of them. And now here in Playtest 8, you get none of them. There are some weird interactions when you apply species traits to wild-shaped forms, so I get the change. But I'll take either you get all of them or you get none of them over the mess we currently have where nobody knows which ones you get and which ones you don't. And here is the final big change. You get temporary hit points when you wild shape. In Playtest 6, it was only Moon Druids that did. And I'm sure this will be popular. You get temporary hit points equal to your Druid level, so it's not a huge number, but it's something. So my take on wild shape is I don't really care about any of these changes for any Druid that's not a Moon Druid. If I use wild shape as a non-Moon Druid, there's a good chance I'm not using it to wild shape at all. I'm using it for Starry Form or Wrath of the Sea or something like that. And if I do use it to wild shape, it's mostly for utility, like turning into a tiny creature to spy or a bird to fly over that ravine or something like that. And those kinds of applications aren't going to be much different at all. So the question really is, how do these changes look on the Moon Druid? Well, before we answer that, we have to look at the new Circle the Moon rules. So at level 3, we get Circle spells. The previous playtest allowed casting Abjuration spells and Moonbeam while wild-shaped, and Moonbeam was an automatic preparation. Now we get a bunch of automatic preparations that we can cast while we're wild-shaped. We have Cure Wounds, Moonbeam, Starry Wisp, then Vampiric Touch at level 5, Fount of Moonlight at level 7, and Dawn at level 9. Now, Cure Wounds got a redesign in this playtest, and Starry Wisp and Fount of Moonlight are new spells in this playtest that I covered in previous videos. I'll link those in the video description. Then we also have Circle Forms, which combines the old Circle Forms, which allowed you to pick CR1 Beast forms, and the old Combat Wild Shape that allowed picking higher challenge rating forms at level 6 and up. There was no real reason for those to be different features, so combining them makes sense. And they also have a rule for armor class here, so in the 2014 Player's Handbook, you just use the armor class of the beast, which is probably pretty crappy. Then in Playtest 6, they said you kept your Druid's armor class minus their shield. Now it's 13 plus your wisdom modifier, which is smoother, and I think that's another good change. And instead of getting their Druid level and temporary hit points like other Druids, they get 3 times their Druid level and hit points. So in the last playtest, it was either 3 times your Druid level or the hit points of the beast form, whichever was lower, a limitation that really didn't add anything. So getting rid of that is probably a good thing. At level 6, the Moon Druid gets 1 additional benefit over the previous version, so they can still replace their damage type with radiant damage, but now they can also add their wisdom modifier to constitution saving throws, which will definitely help with concentration saves. So that's a nice benefit. Then at level 10, we get Moonlight Step, which is the same as the previous version. So the Moon Druid gets a 30-foot bonus action teleport and makes their next attack with advantage a number of times equal to their wisdom modifier per long rest. And they can use a 2nd level spell slot to use it if they're out of uses. And this is a solid feature. And then at level 14, Lunar Form let the Playtest 6 Druid move around their Moonbeam spell effect for free at the start of their turn, and they could bring along passengers when they used Moonlight Step. And that last part has carried forward here, but instead of the Moonbeam thing, each attack just does an extra d10 damage on a hit. So you might have noticed there's a lot of damage boosts for Moon Druids now in the playtest. With the 2014 rules, you basically do the same damage as the Beast, but now you add a d8 when you get Elemental Fury at level 7. then another D8 when that feature scales at level 15, then another D10 here at level 14, then you can cast Fount of Moonlight, which is another 2d6, and you put all those together, and that's like 22 points of extra damage with every attack that hits. And that's a lot of damage. And delivering decent damage was an issue with the old Moon Druid as you got to mid and higher levels. Now we have scaling damage with your level for every attack you make, and that's not even counting what can be accomplished with the Conjure Minor Elemental spell now, though I don't expect that spell to stay as is. So that sounds great. Unfortunately, the Moon Druid is still a bad subclass. I'm not satisfied with it at all. The problem here is the stat blocks they choose from. Let me demonstrate. So here's why this doesn't work. Now, they mentioned putting more beast forms in the player's handbook, so I'm going to be optimistic and say they're going to put all the beasts from the monster manual in the player's handbook. Now, every druid can wild shape, but the whole point of the Moon Druid is to wild shape in combat. That's the difference of wild shape for Moon Druids and everyone else. So if a form isn't viable in combat, it's not really helping the Moon Druid at all. So I'm level 3, and these are my options, and this is a pretty good list. There are spiders, the toad is pretty cool, the direwolf, the classic brown bear, and I think at this point, this version of wild shape is working fine. I mean, there's options here I probably wouldn't bother with, but there's enough here that are good, that do different things, that it's going to feel like a real choice every time that you use wild shape. Though we already have a problem, and the problem is the proficiency bonus. So when you cast a spell, since we're not using a template, we end up using the proficiency bonus of the stat block. So like with the giant spider here, we have a proficiency bonus of +2. So when you cast a spell while wild shaped, that is your proficiency bonus for determining your spell DC and spell attack rolls. Now, at level 3, we're probably looking at a +2 either way. But you get to level 13, and your highest challenge rating option is the elephant. So your character has a proficiency bonus of +5, and then they wild shape into an elephant, and now their proficiency bonus is +2. That's brutal! So right away, when it comes to the wild shape rules, there's got to be something added where you keep your spell save DCs and your spell attack bonuses in wild shape form. I mean, come on. The new Fount of Moonlight spell involves a saving throw. Do we really want that save to be 3 easier because it's being used by a Moon Druid? No way. But we haven't even gotten to the biggest problem yet. So we get to level 6, and here are our challenge rating 2 options. Because stat blocks don't scale, and especially because the proficiency bonus of stat blocks don't scale, it means in order to get improvements to our to-hit rolls, we want to increase our stat block challenge ratings whenever we can. Okay, so that means the cool toad option is gone, the cool spider option is gone, the cool wolf option is gone, but we do add the giant constrictor snake, which does have a cool option, but we're about to get into damage bonuses for every single attack, which means multi-attack kind of becomes a must-have. So what we end up with is a choice between the cave bear and polar bear, which isn't really a choice because these are identical stat blocks, except the cave bear has dark vision. So we go from brown bear to cave bear. But options that used to be cool aren't keeping up as viable combat forms. They're still fine for utility, but that's true for every druid subclass. For the Moon Druid, the whole point is wild shape in combat. We have no options here. So we go from several options to maybe 2 options if we're willing to forgo a bunch of damage to use the constrictor snake for the automatic grapple. Then we get to level 9, and here is our challenge rating 3 options. The Ankylosaurus has 1 attack, so that's no good. So I'm not using the killer whale form unless I'm in the water, and that leaves me with the giant scorpion. Except the giant scorpion has a +4 to hit. I am level 9. If I don't wild shape at all and I just cast Shillelagh, I have a +9 to hit. There's no good options here. So I guess I'm stuck with a cave bear for another 3 levels. Except it's getting worse in comparison to everyone else because stat blocks don't scale. And here's the thing, even if the giant scorpion was a good form, I still wouldn't have any options. So I'd be a giant scorpion every time instead of a cave bear that is getting to be a sucky form every time. And so it's still dull. There's still no choice. So then we get to level 12, and here's our challenge rating 4 options. Sorry, did I say options? Because it's just the elephant. And yeah, the elephant doesn't have multi-attack. So I guess cave bear for another 3 levels. So it's like using the template from Playtest 4, except it's a static block instead of a dynamic one. And those templates were terrible. But somehow this has become even worse, because at least with those old templates, you got your own proficiency bonus. Here we have a +2. This is what happened to our 14th level Moon Druid in the playtest I played in. They were playing at level 14, and they were stuck with Cave Bear. So then we get to level 15, and thank God we actually have a creature with multi-attack now, the giant crocodile. But that's still not having any options. That's just Cave Bear to crocodile. Same form every time, same stats every time. And then I get my final scaling at level 18, and I get the mammoth. I mean, I guess I just stay with giant crocodile. Again, I have no options whatsoever. I haven't had an option with this character since level 6. So how can they fix this? I mean, I guess you could just design a good 10 beasts for challenge ratings 3, 4, 5, and 6 for Moon Druids to choose from. But that is not a realistic expectation. They would have to fill half the player's handbook with stat blocks. Now, one thing they should definitely do is take all the bonuses from dice added to every attack and make it once on your turn. But make the damage bonuses bigger, of course. This reduces the value of multi-attack, so a couple forms like the elephant and mammoth would become okay choices. But the big problem of having only one good form remains. To take care of that, they need to allow the druid to keep their own proficiency bonus when they wild shape. It takes care of so many things. Takes care of the save DCs, takes care of the spell attacks, takes care of the creature attack bonuses. You could even throw in a bonus action attack somewhere, like at level 11, and that would really even out the multi-attack issue as well. So here we have our challenge rating 1 list. Let's say we chose the giant spider at level 3 and it was good, and then at level 6, if we were using our own proficiency bonus, it would still be good. And at levels 9 and levels 12 and level 15 and level 18, it just would stay a good option forever. Along with all the other cool forms on this list as well. Real options every time you wild shape. That is the promise of the Moon Druid. So if that sounds good to you, don't get your hopes up. Because what I have just described is what we call a template. And after Playtest 4, the design team promised us we won't use templates. So honestly, if you're not going to use templates, I don't know how you fix this. I mean, I have one idea. And this is a little sneaky, but you could trick the anti-template crowd. I think we could do that. We have a CR1 giant spider, and then we have a different stat block for a CR2 greater giant spider, and then a CR3 greater giant spider, and so on. You could name them other things as well. Then they would think they're choosing stat blocks, but they're really just choosing one step of a scaling template. But that's going to be a massive number of stat blocks if they want to give significant options. Like, I guess you could pick 4 creatures and then do 5 stat blocks for each. So, I don't know, spider, bear, swimming creature, flying creature. But if they have to do that, that's a real shame. Because with the same room in the book, that could be 20 different templates with really different options for all levels instead of 4. Now I'm looking at the design notes. It says Circle of the Moon updates, and if we look at improved circle forms, it says allows you to make 2 lunar swipe attacks as an action, as well as add your wisdom modifier to your constitution saving throws while you're in your wild shape form. Did you see anything about making 2 lunar swipe attacks? Because I don't see anything about making 2 attacks or lunar swipe being mentioned at all. So I don't know if that was something that maybe was in there and then got taken out. No idea. So for the survey, I think I'm going to mark satisfied for wild shape, because for any non-Moon Druid, I think it works just fine. But Moon Druids, definitely very unsatisfied. Now, allowing the Druid to keep their spell DCs and spell attack bonuses is an easy improvement they could make, as is adjusting damage bonuses to make it so that multi-attack isn't such a must-have option. But honestly, I'm not expecting a Moon Druid in the 2024 Player's Handbook that is satisfactory. We will be choosing stat blocks when we wild shape because I don't see them changing that anymore regardless of the Playtest 8 survey results. And that basically guarantees we will have very few options at higher levels. So my Moon Druid becomes Cave Bear guy. But you know what? That's not really an issue for me because I'm going to still play Druids, I just won't play Moon Druids. It's unfortunate, but I can live with it. Now, just as the Moon Druid kind of falls apart at higher levels, I've mentioned this before, but the Barbarian does too, and we really need some love for Barbarians at higher levels if we aren't just going to multi-class out of them every single time. So in my next video, let's go over the Playtest 8 Barbarian and see how they've addressed that problem. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon. This channel relies on viewers who support this content through Patreon. Please click the link in the video description if you would consider supporting. Today I would like to thank all my mage level supporters. Hey Mr. Wonderful, Babrak, Blue Wolf, John D, Descarpus9, El Conquistadorito, Jared Huberger, John Wayne, Joseph Hall, Joseph Robideau, Joseph Rogers, Wu Carl Kong, Lila Corpsegrave, Michael Michelle, Moxie, Nemo, Paul Suzak, Prometheo NTG, Purge Thunder, Reichenstahl, Rico, Ryan Wilmot, Shane and Todd Beyond, Starfall, Stephen Meline, Earshine, Third, and Wade. And thanks to all the patrons of this channel.